Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Graham Pask, Chairman of Committee. Other members of the committee this evening present are Councillors Graham Bridgman, Jeremy Cottam, Tony Linden, Royce Longton, Alan Macro, Jeff Mays, Richard Somner and Joe Stewart. I have the following officers who are in attendance to advise and support this meeting, and indeed me. That is Bob Dray, Team Lead of Development Control, John Thomas, our tree officer, who will be presenting the main item this evening, Sharon Armour from Legal Services, Sadie Owen, Democratic Services, will be taking minutes, and Tom Dunn, our Zoom host. Welcome, Tom. I think this is your first meeting. Certainly it is with me. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain, really for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and in the meeting room. Representatives making a presentation to committee have been encouraged to do so remotely via Zoom, but we have two gentlemen in person who are equally welcome. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure that you have microphones placed as much in front of them as possible, and ask you to make sure you speak directly into it. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by our trained officers who are present. Please follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is the Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance down the stairs will be assisted accordingly by those trained officers. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted? I see no hands. Before I start with the main items, first of all, Councillor Macro, thank you for conducting the site visits in my absence. So first of all, one other thing. I will ask you, please, there has been one of the speakers, the parish council representative, Councillor Denicia Morsley, is ill, I believe, with COVID. And I would like, therefore, to take a vote that we allow Mike Dennett, also from the parish council, to take her place.
I'm very happy to second that, Chairman. I know Mike.
Thank you. Could I just have a quick show of hands? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. And members, you know me well, I'm sure, but when it does come to voting, I will rely on you putting your hands in the air, ideally in front of the Zoom camera, like that, so our legal officer can do the relevant counting at the necessary time. Right, item one, apologies. Sadie.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillors Alan Law, Ross McKinnon and Keith Woodhams.
And substitutes, I believe.
With substitutes, Councillor Richard Sumner, Graham Bridgman and Joe Stewart.
Jeremy Cottam, I believe.
Oh, sorry, not Richard Sumner, Jeremy
Correct.
Cottam, sorry.
Right, thank you very much. Members, item 2, minutes. Now, minutes have been circulated electronically. I'm privileged having printed copies in front of me, and I believe you also have printed copies now. Could I take them chronologically? There are 2 sets. First of all, minutes of the meeting held Wednesday, 19th of January, 2022. May I have... Sorry, Councillor Bridgman, I see you have your hand up. Councillor Bridgman, you obviously have a comment to make.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I can only comment on the minutes of the 19th of Jan because I wasn't at the meeting, the following meeting. But if you look on page 16, members' questions to officers, it launches into the question without making it clear it was me asking it. That's my only comment, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you know that I was speaking.
We will append your name, and with that minor alteration, Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman. It's got apologies for the inability to attend the meeting. I was actually at the meeting remote because obviously I predetermined the application because it's in my ward and I was against it. So that was technically inaccurate because I was watching it remotely from the meeting, and I've got comments that I made as ward member.
You indeed made comments as ward member, so can I append that? I take legal advice.
Presumably you were not attending the meeting as part of the committee, you were attending it as ward member.
exactly, but it's got here inability to attend the meeting.
Okay,
So
well,
I did that as a ward member.
yeah, so I think it just needs to be clear then that you attended in your capacity as ward member. So you did send apologies for your place on the committee, though.
That's
Which I'm
correct,
assuming,
yes.
yeah.
So if we could just make an alteration, that'd be great.
We will
Thanks.
make the necessary adjustment. With that, members, may I have a show of hands for those to approve the minutes of the 19th of January? At least those who were there. I take it none against. No, thank you very much. I will sign those. And then the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of January, 2022. Any comments, first of all? I'm looking all around. In that case, may I have a show of hands for those of you happy for me to sign them? I think that's all of you who were at that meeting. Thank you very much. I'll sign them now. Members, item 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declaration of interest? Councillor Mays. Sorry, if you could just repeat that with using the microphone.
I'm a member of BONT, I'm a member of CPRE, and I'm also knew the previous owners of Hasenbach, the house that we're discussing the tree on. But I'll take an open mind and make a new decision.
Okay, thank you very much.
Based on that.
Anyone else have any declarations of interest? Councillor Bridgman.
I do put my Zoom hand up.
You did indeed.
Chairman, I know at least one of the signers of the petition reasonably, and I know one of the objectors very well. I will come to this with an open mind, though.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Any other declarations? No? Right. In that case, we come to the item. Item 4, application number TPO 201-21-1046 in Stratfield, Mortimer. I will ask John Thomas, our tree officer, to introduce the item and to give his report. Members, can I just remind you, if you have any questions for Mr. Thomas after, if you could make a note of them until after the public speakers have spoken, just in case those questions come up and then can be answered. Then we'll come back to Mr. Thomas before we start the debate. So, Mr. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The item before you is whether or not to confirm TPO 1046, which concerns a pine tree at Hasenbach, the Beavers, Mortimer. Now, in accordance with the Constitution, members may decide whether to confirm or not confirm, or indeed amend the TPO. And my recommendation is that the preservation order is confirmed without amendment. Could we have the next slide, please, Bob? This is a location plan, and it's centred upon the tree under the TPO, which is within the Beavers, which is a residential estate. And more broadly, it sits within the centre of Mortimer itself. It's a solitary tree, and the Beavers is notable, as I've said in my report, in that it is not a highly vegetated area. It's not a very treed estate, and this tree is quite notable in the context. So I've shown it on my map there that we've got the library, various roads. Victoria Road is the main road in Mortimer. And then we've got the store, which is on the bottom right of the map, which I've arrowed, but is slightly obscured on the Zoom screen by our faces there, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. Can we have the next slide, please? This shows the photos that were taken on the day of the site visit last week. And these sequentially will traverse round from the Beavers in a easterly direction towards King Street and then south on along Victoria Road and back through the estate to Heathfield. Could we have the next slide, please? This is the first photo. So this is the view looking east. As I say, this is the pine, which is under TPO 1046. And although there are other trees visible, you can't see the whole tree from this site. The other trees, you can't see the entirety of those trees, but you can see crowns of mature trees to the rear and some other smaller trees in and about some of the gardens. Could we have the next slide? And this is a closer view. And you can see that the crown is slightly asymmetrical. So there's a crown bias to the south. And what I've tried to illustrate with this photo is that there's a small Scots pine behind the pine. This is a black pine under TPO 1046. So it is slightly confusing in some photos that we have a second tree close by, but it's a different species. And one of the properties nearby is number 10 King Street. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is the view into the site. You can see that the tree is close to the entrance. It's close to the drive, and it's quite a large stem. Can we have the next slide, please? This shows the concrete drive. There's been a recent vehicle impact, unfortunately, at the base of the stem, and you can see that is resin weeping from that. I estimate that wound is about 12 to 15 centimetres diameter. And given growth rates in the UK, I would imagine that wound will take about 12 to 15 years to close up. And then the right-hand photo shows some small branches which have fallen out, presumably in the recent storms. Can you have the next slide, please? Thank you. This is the view back, which is not necessarily a public view. This is west from the accesses to some of the properties in King Street. So this is a private access. And you can see, again, slightly asymmetric crown, and you can see these large scaffold limbs on the southern side, which is where the people are standing. And one of those has a suboptimal union, I would suggest, but it's not a significant hazard. Can we have the next slide, please? And again, this is the view from King Street down that private access. So we're looking west here, and there's a slight, the tree is slightly obscured by the Scots pine, but you can see it's a skyline feature. Can we have the next slide? Thanks. Again, another shot from King Street. Again, the tree is visible from distance. Can we have the next, please? Thank you. Again, another photo. This is down King Street. This is close to the car park of Budgeon Superstore. This is the rear of, I think, number 17, Victoria Road. And you can see, again, the tree is a skyline feature. Could we have the next one, please? So the tree from part of Victoria Road is not very visible in certain views, and this is one of those views. There are other more significant trees along Victoria Road. And the tree under the TPO is just that small crown near the triangle, and there is another conifer in front which slightly obscures it. Can we have the next, please? This is a view from Victoria Road towards the library, so public area, and you can see that the tree is on the skyline. Can we have the next, please? Again, this is from the car park of the library, so again, a sort of public place, and it's quite a clear view of that tree, and this is the southern face of the tree. could we have the next, please? And again, this is from Heathfield, which is a local estate road. Thank you. Could we close? Thanks. The tree has been assessed using a scoring method called tempo, and I've alluded to that, and it appears in the appendices. That's Appendix 5, and you can see the logical scoring system that we've used, and this is the scoring system that we typically use for assessing trees and whether or not they're suitable for preservation orders. So there might be a very large number of trees in the district that have high amenity, and a large part of the assessment is based on amenity, but it might not necessarily be expedient to serve a preservation order. So there are two elements to the scoring system, the amenity and the expediency. And in this case, because there is a known threat to the tree, then this is expedient to place a preservation order on. And it's scored quite highly. It's scored, I've scored it as 20 points, and above 14 definitely merits a TPO. Now, there is some mention made of other scoring systems, and I've included those in the appendices, and you've probably seen those. So apologies for repeating myself, but those are illustrative examples. And the one, Helliwell, is to do with landscape value, and the other, Cavat, which hasn't come out very well, I'm afraid. That's to do with replacement costs, and it's based on the age of the tree and how much it would cost to replace like for like, in effect. So I've revised the Cavat on the basis of the site visits. This tree stem has approximately 70 centimetres diameter, and that's bumped the Cavat figure up. Unfortunately, Cavat has not reproduced well in the appendices. That's appendix number 7. So Bob, if you could just go to the second to end slide, there's a new Cavat figure, which is £37,000. Okay, and that's a replacement cost. And Cavat is something used by the London Tree Officers Association. So I hope I've demonstrated that the tree has...
Chairman, point of order.
Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, the pack clearly has a final value of 27,000. Question for officers, whether or not we don't allow applicants to bring, in a planning application, to bring fresh material within 5 working, unless it's outside 5 working days. Do we allow the council to bring documentation that's outside 5 working days? Because the figures are different.
I'll ask our legal officer, or...
I think planning officers quite often put stuff in the update sheet that has come in since, the initial agenda was published. And I think this is basically what's happened here. Mr. Thomas has put something in the update sheet.
I think I've made my point, Jim.
Yeah.
I think you have. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Thomas, carry on, please.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm sure members have read my report, so I don't want to repeat myself. And obviously we have objectors here, and you'll take their comments into account. One of the principal objections seems to be that the tree represents a significant risk, i.e. it's dangerous. And that's, in my opinion, and on the basis of the site inspection I carried out last week and I've carried out before, and on the basis of information that we've received, this tree does not represent a danger, in my opinion. It's got no sign of disease. It has no significant structural defects, although there are suboptimal unions which can be managed. There's no evidence submitted, and I don't believe that the tree is dangerous, and therefore I think it's appropriate that preservation order is placed upon it. Is that all right for now, Chairman?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. And as always, members, if you have any questions, if you could just please make a note of them, and we'll go on to the public speakers. And could I please be advised when Mr. Dennett from the Parish Council? Are you with us, Mr. Dennett? Are you mic'd?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Right. Can you hear us, Mr. Dennett?
I can hear you.
Mr. Dennett?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I'm here.
Mr. Dennett, you're unmuted, I see, and I see a yellow square around you, which implies that you're trying to talk, but we don't hear you here. And we don't see you either. Could I just ask you, please, to check that you are unmuted and possibly if we could see you?
I'm unmuted. My camera's on. Oh dear.
I see you have your hand up, Mr. Dennett. As I say, if you could try unmuting again, or perhaps is there anything else you could do to see if you can make yourself heard?
Is there anything you can? No, I can't do that. Sorry, is that the one? Yeah.
Oh, we can now see you, Mr. Dennett. That's a good start.
I apologise. It was a sort of, I had to start the video. I wish I didn't.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I proceed? Can you hear me still?
I'm going to ask someone to explain how you can test your microphone, Mr. Dennett. Just hold on 1 second.
I'm not sure if you've got the same functions as us, but on the unmute and mute, there's a little arrow and you can try to test your microphone to see if it's working. Because it might be the sound on your computer hasn't been switched on properly.
Oh dear.
I mean, Mr. Dennett, we can't hear you by this means. If you could perhaps telephone, you have a number on the invitation to this meeting. Are you able to phone us and then you can talk to us on the telephone?
Yes. Oh dear, sorry. What? Oh. Don't quite know what I can.
Right. Well, Mr. Dennett, we have a potential, hopefully a potential solution where we're going to log you out and log you back in. So I believe you don't have to do anything. Is that correct? No, we will do that this end. So let's give that a try. If that doesn't work, if you could then work out how you could call in, perhaps I could go to the other gentlemen who are in the room to speak and then come back to you at the end, if that's all right. But let's just try that once more if we can. Right, Mr. Dennett, it appears now that we see you again. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Obviously not. Everything seems to be...
Right, I think we still can't hear you. Are you able
Chairman,
to...
can I just assist? I've just emailed Mike my invite, which has the phone numbers
at
the bottom of it. So, Mike, if you look at your SMPC emails, you should be able to see the phone number to dial in.
Okay, thank you. I will do that.
Could we
straight
leave
away.
that with you, Mr. Dennett? And what I will do is I have the two objectors wishing to speak. So
Yes.
can I take them first? I promise I'll come back to you. But if you
Yeah.
could look at the email that Councillor Bridgman has forwarded to you, and perhaps you could try calling in, and
Yeah.
then we'll see if we can establish communications.
Okay,
Is that
thank you.
okay?
Yes, yeah.
Put a thumbs up.
Where's it gone?
Well, I see you're smiling. I hope that's okay. So
Yeah,
without
that's okay.
further ado, I have two objectors in the chamber here, Mr. Hayter and Mr. Morris Ashton. Welcome, gentlemen. If you go to the dais, or I think it's Mr. Morris Ashton who's going to do the talking, but if there are any questions, Mr. Hayter, whose name is on the paper, can join in and help answer questions. I will give you asked for a half-time warning, Mr. Morris Ashton. So I will do that, and I will tell you when you have a minute to go. But when you finish speaking, if you'd please remain there and for any questions that members may have for you. So your time starts when you speak.
So I'm speaking on behalf of some of the objectors, and I'm an objector myself. I'll be making two key submissions. Firstly, that confirmation of this order would be otherwise in accordance with the pertinent regulations, in that the tree has little or no amenity value, and it is not expedient to confirm the order. And secondly, to confirm the order would be a breach of human rights. I shall be referring to my letter of objection and the recommendation summary. So on the subject of amenity value, whilst the local authority may argue that the tree is healthy and therefore not dangerous, notwithstanding the comments about the suboptimal leverage position that Mr. Thomas mentioned, a large pine tree towering above residential properties is of in itself objectively dangerous. All of the foliage is concentrated at the top of the tree, and it towers above residential properties. There's nothing to stop the wind coming in and taking this down in a phenomenon known as wind throw. On the subject of retention span in tempo, whilst the species enjoys a degree of longevity, the older and taller this tree gets, the more likely it is to be uprooted in strong winds. And on the subject of relative public visibility, those of you that attended the site meeting will realise that the tree is only properly visible from the Beavers estate, and that the photos from Victoria Road and King Street, you really have to look very, very hard in small numbers of places to be able to see the tree from those positions. On the subject of human rights, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll just mention this briefly. The committee will understand that any decision that they make must not infringe people's human rights, and we're submitting that confirmation of this order would be contrary to Articles 1, 2 and 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, turning to the recommendation summary, first of all, I'd like to take you to point 1.4. It's mentioned here that there's a tree at 16 King Street, sorry, at 24 King Street, and that there's a TPO on this tree, and that the tree subject to this order is much more prominent. However, committee members should note that there is also a large pine tree at 16 King Street. This is not subject to a tree preservation order, and I'd suggest that there's no uniformity in the application of the regulations here in the village.
2 minutes left. I didn't want to interrupt you with half time.
Thank you. And looking at 1.6, again, it's only really visible from the Beavers, and you'll note from the petition that most of the people in the Beavers are not agreeable to the confirmation of this order. Looking at 4.3, it's noted that this is a skyline feature, and for the reasons that I've just mentioned, it's only really visible from the Beavers. And you'll note that an application to reduce the height of the tree has been given. Therefore, this argument that it's a skyline feature will fall away once the height is reduced. Looking at Point 4.6, the author of the summary concedes that it is a concern for those people living in the path of this tree, and therefore that is an acknowledgement that there is a breach of human rights here. 4.7, these are statistics about the risk of being hit by a tree. Quite frankly, they're risible and unhelpful. They're talking about the general risk of being hit by any tree anywhere in the country, and it's not the risk of being hit by this tree, which I would suggest will be virtually certain in strong winds. 4.10, where it talks about pine trees being wind firm. I've spent the last couple of weeks reading a lot of literature which suggests that that's just simply not true, and that pine trees are the most likely tree to come down in strong winds.
30 seconds remaining.
And at point 4.13, it talks about the biodiversity value, carbon, etc. However, there are global studies at universities worldwide that suggest that pine trees are actually the largest natural contributor to air pollution, and understand that in certain countries, Norway, etc., that had large pine forests, they are engaging in deforestation of pine trees to improve the air quality of those countries.
If I could ask you to make your conclusions, please.
To conclude, I would ask the committee to do the right thing, not confirm this order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for Mr. Maurice Ashton, or indeed he has the help of Mr. Hayter if required? Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said that you thought it would be virtually certain that this tree would fall. Is that backed up by any expert evidence at all?
Well, I spent the recent time at 10 King Street during the recent storms, and the people that live there were terrified, and it's just a matter of time. We don't have any expert evidence because people are very reluctant to give representations which people might rely on and then sue on. So unfortunately, we don't have any expert evidence, but just anecdotal evidence of the danger, the risk that the tree poses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to extend that, and for clarity, you note that the storms were evident in your area, but the tree remained standing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, what's your point?
What you stated that the tree would certainly come down in storms. Yet
no, I haven't. I haven't stated that it will certainly come down in storms.
That was the suggestion, was that the tree would be coming down in bad weather.
Yes, as the older and taller it gets, the risk increases.
Okay, thank you. Members, I'm still looking for questions. Councillor Bridgman. Sorry, Councillor Sommer, do you have any further question or supplementary? Okay, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. You said that the commentary at 4.7, which is the general statistics of danger from trees, is risible.
Yes.
And you referred back to 4.6, but 4.6, just to pick up on the point that Councillor Summers just made, 4.6 expressly says that no professional evidence or opinion has been submitted by the objectors to support their assertions that this tree is dangerous. Now, you've just said that you don't have expert evidence. So why isn't the general risk of a tree falling or a branch falling of pertinence here if you do not have expert evidence that this specific tree is dangerous? Shouldn't the committee look at the generality?
Well, no, because let's use an analogy here. One might say that the chance of being eaten by a lion is rather minuscule in this country, generally. However, if you're a lion tamer, then your chances of being eaten by a lion, I would suggest, are far greater, just as a house that sits in the target path of a tall pine tree is far more likely to be hit than it would be generally by any tree in the country.
If I may, Chairman, you'll accept that there are a number of quite large trees in Mortimer. Are you saying that none of them should continue to stand because there is a risk of them falling over?
Well, no. There are large woodlands and there aren't houses underneath those trees in the woodlands. So I think it's axiomatic that I'm not suggesting that.
Sorry, but you referred to the large Scots pine at 16 King Street. If you know that if you go along Victoria Road, there are a large number of large trees, yes, all of which on your analysis could fall over and cause and pose a danger to those living in houses adjacent.
Yeah, and you'll note from the site inspection that they don't have that crown bias leaning towards a house. And I don't live under those trees, so I'm not as concerned as I am about the tree that might fall on our property.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mays.
Mr. Hayter, you said that the pine, or the likelihood of a pine tree falling, was one of the most likely trees to fall. I would suggest possibly that silver birch trees are much more vulnerable, and they are the majority of the trees that I've noticed around in the Mortimer and the woodland area between Mortimer and Newbury that have fallen during the last 2 weeks during that recent storm. So I think probably the pine tree is more stable than a silver birch tree, which is very, very vulnerable. And I had one of that sort of size falling in my garden on the hurricane that Michael Fish misdiagnosed, and that didn't do any damage either.
Is there a question here, Councillor Mays?
I was making a statement, sir.
Well, no, we're into questions, please.
Well, I'm saying that the pine trees are less vulnerable than silver birches.
We will come on to debate shortly. Do you have any questions for?
No, in that case, I don't.
Right,
I made
okay.
the point.
I'll come back to you during the debate. Members, still on questions emphasised for the gentlemen who are objecting. Right, we'll let you off there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now,
Chairman, may I give you a point of information?
You may give us a point of information, Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, I've had an email from one of the reporters at Newbury Weekly News who tells me that Councillor Dennett is perfectly audible on the YouTube stream. So it's something at our end where we're not picking up his audio, not his audio, apparently, Chairman, just for information.
Well, I hope that assures Councillor Dennett, and I'm sure we will look into this. But let's get on with the meeting. Let's see if Councillor Dennett, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
Hear you clearly. So I'm delighted that you persevered and we've got you. I'm sure you just heard what Councillor Bridgman said. These gremlins do creep into the system, don't they? So Councillor Dennett, welcome. You have up to 5 minutes to make the point of the parish council that you wish to make. Please remain there after you have spoken. For any questions that members may have, may I assist you with any timekeeping?
Thank you for your patience. The parish council did not make a formal response because of some confusion over the process, but it sent comments in which are in the update report. The parish council supports the TPO, though in its comments it said it would not object to removal of one branch if that was the expert opinion. We understand the neighbours are concerned about their possibility of damage to their properties, and we're obviously concerned about the safety of our inhabitants. But this is a healthy tree with projected lifespan of 60 to 70 years. We should not allow the felling of a healthy tree simply because they're close to houses. We believe the risk of damage has been overstated. Mortimer is a rural village and trees are an integral part of the landscape and infrastructure. Allowing the felling of the tree would set a precedent for other trees in the village, although these are largely in other places in the village rather than the area concerned at the moment. Contrary to some of the objections, the tree is visible from most of the surrounding area. And I think that's been supported by the photographs I've seen from John Thomas. The surrounding area, the Beavers, Victoria Road, Heathfield, King Street and Winwood Road. I walked around the area this afternoon and you can see the tree very clearly from all of those positions. The tree is a substantial feature of the rectangular area, which does not have many other large trees. Removal of the tree would be a considerable loss of aerial landscape and amenity of this part of the village. And then finally, at typical growth rates, this mature tree would probably absorb 900 to 1 ton of CO2 per year. That may be small on a global scale, but it's going to take a lot of remaining replanting of trees to do that. So the parish council position is that we support the TPO and believe this tree should be preserved. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Members, questions? I see Councillor Bridgman has his hand up.
Chairman, thank you. Councillor Dennett, Mike. Let me just test you on the precedent issue. You say that if this tree were, if it was permitted, if the TPO was not confirmed and therefore the owner of the land could cut down the tree with alacrity, that would set a precedent for other trees in Mortimer. But I put it to you that there aren't that many TPOs across Mortimer. I appreciate there are quite a few TPOs across Mortimer, but not every tree in Mortimer is TPO'd by any stretch of the imagination. And no one appears to be itching to cut them down. How is the non-confirmation of this TPO setting a precedent in that scenario?
Okay, I agree that there probably are not enough TPOs in place in Mortimer. But there are plenty of mature trees that form part of the landscape. I just feel that the fact that this tree could be allowed to be felled would encourage people to fell other trees, essentially, even if they're not protected.
You have an answer there, Councillor Bridgman. Members, any other questions for the parish council? Looking at the Zoom hands, I'm also looking around. We're going to let you off lightly, Mr. Dennett.
Okay, thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your perseverance as well. Now we have the pleasure of all 3 ward members who are actually all members of the planning committee. So, gentlemen, you have up to 5 minutes to share. The same rule applies at this stage, although, of course, you can enter debate and make your additional comments during debate. So I think you've got it both ways there. So,
Chairman, could I suggest that we just go to debate and after questions to officers and we could, because we can all speak in debate, and so it seems a bit farcical to then use up the 5.
That is the sensible, pragmatic way forward, and I'm grateful to you for suggesting it. Thank you very much. So, members, you've heard various points raised. You obviously haven't, but the point is also, Councillor Bridgman, that anything the ward members say might engender questions which could be answered with the tree officer. But what I will do is, if anything does crop up during debate, we can always pause debate and bring Mr. Thomas back to answer those points, can't we?
Well, of course, so, Chairman, we still do have questions to officers.
Yeah, well, I was about to come to that. No, I'm not trying to skip a step. I was just gently making the point that we normally let ward members speak because there could be specific questions. So, members, at this stage, adding to hopefully no more confusion, are there any questions you have for Mr. Thomas at this point before we enter debate? I will, of course, allow further questions to be asked of him should that need arise during the debate. So, Councillor Longton.
There are clearly a lot of objections to this TPO, but I haven't heard, apart from the parish council, as much support. Have we got a lot of support as well?
I think it's only from the parish council, as you say.
There is clearly support from the parish council. I haven't heard much more support for the TPO. Has there been a lot of support? There's clearly been a lot of objections. No. There hasn't. It's just the parish council representations that we've had. Okay.
Right. In that case, in order of Zoom hand, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. for those who, this is a question I know the answer to, but because I asked Mr. Thomas at the site visit, but for those who weren't at the site visit, I think it's important that we explore that. Reference has been made to the Scots pine at 16 King Street, and you and I, Mr. Thomas, had a discussion about that tree at the site visit. Now, firstly, could you confirm my impression that Scots pine is actually, the crown of that Scots pine is actually higher relatively than the crown of the tree we're discussing? And secondly, give me and give the committee your reasoning as to why there isn't a TPO on that tree as opposed to the one we're discussing.
We're just going to put a street view picture up of that.
Yeah, indeed. I had a conversation with Mr. Dre beforehand to suggest that we might want to look at that.
We could just pause and let I think Mr. Dre find the picture, and then I'll ask Mr. Thomas to answer the question. Is that the one, Councillor Bridgman?
It is indeed, Chairman.
Well, there are two things I would say about this tree. The first thing is the expediency element of the preservation order hasn't been met. As far as I know, there's no threat against this tree. And then also, when we looked at it on site, there's a union lower down the stem, which I would be concerned for, which is a bit tighter, well, considerably tighter actually. And I think there's a bifurcation where two stems are pressing against one another. So that is in itself a structurally weak form. So I wouldn't necessarily want to put a preservation order on a tree like this.
Come back if I may, Chairman. I'm interested by this expediency argument, which seems to be someone, you hear that someone might wish to cut down a tree, and that then turns into an expediency argument, and there's then the question as to whether a TPO should be present. I mean, I'm right in thinking that the owner of 16 King Street could, if they wish, and this is the point I made to Councillor Dennett, cut that tree down with alacrity because it's a tree growing in their garden. There's nothing to stop them doing that. And that is the same for all of the trees in Mortimer or elsewhere that don't have tree preservation orders on them. Just get that confirmed.
Yes, that's correct, unless, of course, there's a slight caveat to that. In a conservation area, all trees are automatically protected when they're above 3 inches.
I take that point.
75 mil. But yes, that's true. And equally, the way that the tempo assessment has been constructed, and certainly this refers back to the legislation, which says it's expedient. Section 198 of the Town and Country Planning Act suggests expediency. So it wouldn't be appropriate necessarily for the town, for the planning authority to put a preservation order, a blanket across all the trees in its area.
Happy, Councillor Bridgman? Right, thank you very much. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In section 4.9 of our report, at the end, it says that a tree works application for a 2 metre crown reduction has been approved. Am I right in thinking that means a reduction in height? And is that going to actually have a detrimental effect on the appearance of the tree?
Thank you. It is a height reduction, and the sides are brought in to match, so there'll be a lesser lateral reduction associated with that. It will reduce the volume of the crown. The condition on the application is to good growth points. So it's important that the tree still has viable tissue, and because I shouldn't get into details, should I, really? When you cut a broadleaf, there are epicormic buds which will flush. When you cut a conifer, there aren't those epicormic buds. So you have to work within the green canopy when you're doing this reduction. So it's a limited reduction, but it will serve to reduce the volume and the weight of the tree. Hope that helps.
Well, thank you. I think I understood that very clearly, Mr. Thomas. I'm grateful. Thank you. Councillor Mays.
Mr. Thomas, in the caveat costing of the tree, how would you replace a tree like this if it were cut down? I just don't understand, say how you can put a value on it. It's a major engineering job to actually lift a tree and the bowl of earth with it if you want to replace that tree. I just don't understand how that value works.
Can you
it certainly
explain?
Isn't worth 27,000 in timber.
But Mr. Thomas, how do you work out the value?
Well, as I say, in my discussion, we don't use carrot very often.
No, but you've got to here.
So apologies for that. It is possible to replace mature trees and large trees, but not extremely large trees. And you can use a tree spade, for example, for a reasonable sized tree. How successful that is. A tree spade, by the way, is a sort of scoop on the back of a truck, which scoops up the tree and the root plate and the soil. And then you transport it to where you want it to go and replant it. So it is possible, but not a tree of this size, no. And with regard to the calculation, well, I've just followed the system that's with caveat within the guidance itself. So there are considerations about the number of people who might see it, so the population density. There are considerations about, oh, sorry, I've got a slide about that. Bob, if you could just go down one on that. Is it possible to show that, to show your screen? I'll go up. After the caveat itself. Yeah, is that possible? Yeah, please. So this should just illustrate what they're thinking about when they're trying to assess the replacement value of a tree, and they're extrapolating from costs, they say, from planting and relevant factors. So, as I've said, the community tree index is how many people there are in that area and how accessible it is. What the functional value, how it's performing biologically. So this is a healthy tree. It's got good vitality. It has a slight crown bias, and then the amenity value, positive and negative. So some trees might shed fruit that might be unwelcome in a pedestrian area, etc., etc. And life expectancy speaks for itself. I hope that's useful.
Well, I hope it is too. I'm sure we'll bring out more points in debate. Are you happy, Councillor Mays, at this stage, at least? Thank you, Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, really, it's the question of safety. I'm very reluctant to see trees removed, but just really looking for reassurance from the officer. I accept his word that this tree is now safe and is in good condition, but we looked at the base of the tree and I noticed there was a lot of concrete over there and compaction of the roots. So I'm just looking for reassurance that we expect this tree, in the conditions that it's living in at the moment, will continue to be healthy.
Right, Mr. Thomas, how can you reassure us?
Well, I suppose that there is a point that the council doesn't own this tree, it's owned privately, and the householder has a responsibility to a common law responsibility, a duty of care to others that might be affected by the tree. So in practice, working that out, it would be sensible to have a specialist look at the tree from time to time. That's an undefined period in law. So yes, it's impacting the concrete drive, and I think the householder was talking about replacing the concrete drive. And the roots are growing around that, and the base of the tree is growing towards that concrete. It will morph itself around, and the structural roots are beneath that. Some of the structural roots are beneath that, so they will continue to grow. So the tree will, although it's got this impediment, if you like, of a concrete base, the tree will grow around it.
So, Chairman, one will ask, the expectation, unless something varies, is that it will continue in a good state of health.
Yes, I think so. And
thank you.
But that should be monitored from time to time.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. Just continuing on that theme, clearly from the objectors' letters that I've read at length, whether we don't live in this area, so I think it's important that we take their views into account. And very clearly, they are concerned about this tree. So my question is, and it's building from what's just been talked about there, is about, in particular, there's the question that Councillor Macro raised about the crown reduction. And I don't know whether, I didn't understand from the response whether that would actually reduce the risk of it falling or any sort of damage taking place to the properties. And then my second question would be the mention of wind throw, which one of the objectors raised, and it's mentioned within the paper. Could you just describe what wind throw is and how potentially it could affect this tree?
Well, I think I can answer, hopefully I can answer both questions at the same time. Wind throw is caused by the wind stress acting on the tree, and where if the root plate gives way, then the tree will collapse. Now, there's been a fair bit of research carried out over the years, and we refer to standard texts and so on into that. If there is a disease maybe that affects the root plate, there are certain specialist fungi that might attack trees at the stem base and the root plate. That's a risk factor, and that increases the risk of wind throw. And that's something to assess from time to time, as I've indicated. If there, I'm trying to think what other factors, if there were works carried out which maybe unbalance the tree, then again there's more stress on one side of the tree, and that might also lead to wind throw. So by carrying out this crown reduction, the wind sail affecting the tree is reduced, the stresses acting on the stem and the root plate are reduced. So there's a lower risk associated with wind throw, I would suggest.
Okay.
Would it be right if I ask another question, Chairman?
Yes, please do.
Now, I'm not a tree expert, clearly, and that's why we have officers who are experts. And it was mentioned about pine trees actually giving off more air pollution than other types of tree. Could you just talk about that, just to help me understand how that affects this particular case, I guess?
Sorry, I have to say I'm not aware of that. What has been referred to there, so I have to apologise for that. I don't know. Pine trees might give off terpenes and things like that, complex hydrocarbons, but I haven't seen any research done into that, and that's not a consideration with regard to the preservation.
So you're not aware of that actually being the case with pine trees?
I'm not saying it isn't. I don't think it's a huge factor with regard to the amenity. I don't think it's an issue here because we have a solitary tree in an urban area, a built-up area, as opposed to the reference, I think, was back to forestry in Norway. But I haven't researched that myself. I apologise.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Councillor Linden, finally.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. I'd like to ask Mr. Thomas, because obviously I'm like my co-councillor, I'm not an expert on trees. The crown, I take it, is the top bit of the tree, or is it the foliage of that top bit on that tree? Because obviously the stem is the rest of it, and then obviously you've got the base. Am I correct in what I'm saying?
Yes. So it'll be the branches and the foliage, as you say.
Thank you, Chairman.
And finally, I'm going to claim chairman's privilege and ask a question. Mr. Thomas, without making any presumptions at all, but let's generalise it actually more. If a tree has a TPO and that tree becomes damaged at any time for whatever reason, be it a fungal infection, wind damage or whatever, could you briefly outline the procedure that someone could contact you and what you would allow?
Sorry, I noted briefly.
I did use the term briefly, yes. I mean, I think in a nutshell, can one apply for a TPO tree to be trimmed or even removed if it becomes damaged?
Yes. And obviously there's some storm damage recently. So I've been dealing with a few cases where we've had 5-day notices for emergency tree works, and that gives us an opportunity within 5 days to go and visit the tree and agree with a tree specialist, arborist or somebody, what work can be carried out to alleviate a danger.
Thank you very much. Right, members, I think we have concluded all questions. I think it's right that we probe all the technicalities. So who is going to start the debate? Councillor Cottam.
Thank you, Chairman. There was obviously a lot of concern by residents locally on this, a lot of worry and a lot of concern about the tree. And I think this is why it's a very good thing that this has come forward to the committee to basically show that it has been looked at very, very carefully by our officers who are expert in this, and to hopefully reassure with the lack of any evidence to the counterwise, that this tree is safe and will stand and will continue for a long time. I think it's had some quite severe tests in the recent month, which I think goes to prove that it is in a good health condition. I'm further reassured by your question that you posed that if it does become struck by lightning or we get more horrendous hurricanes, as Mr. Fish would say, that we may be more prone. And so I'm glad to hear that there's there can be a response to any changing environment for this tree. I'm extremely, but having said that, while the safety of the public is always my first concern, I am reassured with this investigation that we've done that this is a safe tree. And while we're trying to plant a lot more trees, I'm very reluctant to take out a tree which seems to be in good, healthy condition. I know some people have referred to it as ugly. It's always in the eye of the beholder. I think it looks magnificent. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Councillor Cotton. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's understandable that people who live next to or close to a tall tree will be concerned that it might possibly fall in a storm. And there's a very large, high poplar tree outside my next door neighbour, which if it fell would probably affect our property, maybe us. However, as a parish councillor said, if every tree that people thought was the slightest risk of falling was cut down, then our built-up areas would be denuded of trees. And trees provide a very valuable aspect to the environment, in visually, I mean. I think I understand the concerns, but I think we've been reassured that this tree is safe, and that the residents' concern, understandable, is possibly misplaced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, thank you. Clearly, I think we're looking at two aspects of this tree. One is the question as to whether it poses a danger, and the other is to whether it has an amenity value. Start with the first. Oh, by the way, for the minutes, Budgeons is now the co-op. So far as danger, I reject the danger argument entirely. This tree has stood up to a substantial storm recently. If there had been evidence presented by the objectors from tree surgeon or the like that this tree was dangerous, I'd fully accept it. But we have no evidence before us about the danger or otherwise of the tree. And that is my concern. And I reject the Human Rights Act on the same basis. If there was a Human Rights Act argument about trees falling over, every person would be objecting to every tree TPO on the basis the tree might fall over. And I think the recent storm said that trees do fall over, but predicting which ones will do and which ones won't, and is a interesting argument. And I think this tree, the evidence before us is this tree is healthy, and there is no evidence against that argument. However, I do have a concern about the amenity value. We referred to and we saw the street view image of the Scots pine at 16, and I entirely accept the argument that the look of the view of that tree, the bareness of that tree going up to the crown, doesn't make it susceptible for TPO. I entirely accept that, but I think the same sort of argument can be levied at this black pine. The photographs really didn't do this argument justice, but if you stand in the beavers and look at that tree, it leans to one side, it's very side heavy, and it's bare all the way up on one side, pretty much to the crown. Now, in terms of its view from the rest of Mortimer, I drove up from my house at the bottom of the hill down towards the station up, and I deliberately looked to see what I could view as I drove up, as I drove past the fairground in Mortimer. And you can see a pine peaking above the houses along the edge there and above the co-op store and so on and so forth. And it's not this tree, it's that Scots pine. The Scots pine, from different angles, until you get into King Street and see the bareness of that Scots pine, the amenity value of that Scots pine, I would suggest, is higher than the amenity value of this tree when viewed. So I do not think this has the amenity value that officers are affording it. I regret to say that. And I do think that the argument that no one should be cutting trees down, if that were the case, there wouldn't be any trees in Mortimer. They would all be TPO'd. Clearly, we have a lot of Mortimer has a lot of greenery, has a lot of trees, and I don't think this particular tree stands out so much from the fold that it should be afforded the TPO. There are trees in Mortimer that certainly are deserving of TPOs. I just don't think this is one of them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have two more councillors wishing to speak. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I am inclined to agree with Councillor Cottam in terms of the situation regarding this tree and the danger. And certainly, as Councillor Bridgman said, we haven't seen any evidence. And I think actually it's unfortunate words to use, virtually certain in high winds, when actually we've had exactly that circumstance happen recently and the tree is still standing. And Chairman, also, I think your point was a very well made one about any changes in condition of the tree in future could actually be reported, and obviously action may then need to change if there was indeed evidence of poor condition and danger to life. But certainly I can't see anything at the moment that's been presented that suggests to me that we should change this TPO.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Somner. Then I'll be looking for, Councillor Longton too, of course, as another ward member. Then I will be looking for a proposal. Councillor Somner.
Thank you. I have to say I also agree with the sentiments of Councillor Cottam. I wonder if you might indulge another point of clarification from the officer with regards to the work that's been approved for the groundwork, and is it going to? Does he have the detail on the the request that's been put in, is it going to address the somewhat lopsided crown that we currently have in place?
Right. Can you assist Mr. Thomas?
Well, some of the lopsidedness, quote unquote, is to do with those two large scaffold branches on the south side, and that's not what is going to be removed. So those are the branches that you see on the emanating at the base on the south side, lower down, sorry, on the south side. So the crown reduction is going to be in height. It would be sensible as part of the crown reduction to incorporate a tip reduction of those scaffold branches, particularly the one with the slightly poorer union, the tighter union, and that would reduce the risk associated with that. But no, it's not going to do anything about the quote unquote lopsidedness. Pines, can I just say, if I may, pines don't necessarily have uniform symmetrical crowns, particularly Caledonian Scots pines. They have very gnarly and unusual crowns.
Thank you, Chairman. And with that in mind, I think it's forming an opinion for me as to the level of work that is being done and the care that's being taken to maintain the tree. That helps. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Longton.
Thank you, Chairman. I think my views have consolidated a little during the debate. I've no doubt about the amenity value of this tree. I think it's considerable amenity value, a tree of that size, that location. But I was concerned about the safety angle, and I have been somewhat reassured this evening that it's probably as safe as any large tree is likely to be. So I probably will be voting in favour of the recommendation. Do have one query though. There's a lot of talk this evening about that tree and a Scots pine. Well, if this tree isn't a Scots pine, what kind of pine is it?
Well, just for completeness, Mr. Thomas, can you assist what sort of pine it is, please?
Yeah, sorry, this is a black pine.
Black pine.
Yeah,
which is clearly different from a Scots pine.
Yeah, Scots pines have red bark, black pines, black bark.
There you go.
There are a number of subspecies, and I'm not going to attempt a subspecies.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your elucidation. Members, I'm looking for a proposal. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's no safety aspect. I'm fairly well convinced at this moment in time that we should keep the TPO because of its environmental importance in terms of CO2 capture. And I would like to propose that we keep the TPO.
Is that seconded? Councillor Macro is seconding. Any other comments before I go to a vote? Those in favour of the proposal, which is to what's the word I'm looking for? To maintain the TPO in its current form.
So it is to be confirmed without
Confirmed.
amendment.
Sorry, I was hunting for the word. I stand corrected, as always. To confirm this TPO without modification. Those in favour, please show hands in front of your cameras. I think that's it. And I believe one anyone against? Oh, Councillor Bridgman is against. So that is carried, and I declare that this TPO is confirmed without modification. Thank you very much. Just before I close the meeting, members, first of all, of course, I would ask you to remain seated until live streaming has stopped. But our next meeting will be on the 30th of this month, which would, of course, mean that site visits still at this time of year would be in the morning of the week before the 23rd. As always, I'm not certain. I'm sure the planning officers cannot assist us greatly as to what is likely to come up. But if you could note those dates in your diary, for potential visits and the meeting, I would be grateful. So without further ado, may I ask the meeting to be closed, please?